event. My name is Chris Manfredi. I'm the president of the Hawaii Coffee Association. We have planned a virtual talk story today. We've assembled a very impressive group of panelists. The purpose of this event is to discuss coffee industry priorities with an emphasis on coffee leaf rust. Panelists will have an opportunity to introduce themselves and their organization and give an overview of their past and potential contributions. Following this portion of the event, we will host a roundtable discussion among the participants with the goal of establishing actionable items that support Hawaii's coffee industry. The invited audience will be comprised of coffee industry stakeholders, including HCA members, but it is open to the public. The link has been shared widely. So far, the tally on panelists is 22, and members of the audience is 75. We will make the event recording available after the session. We will take questions in the second half of the event. I'll go over the schedule briefly. I won't introduce everyone. I'll leave that to the individuals and organizations to introduce themselves. That will also save me the embarrassment of mispronouncing anyone's name. The schedule as it stands will start after my introduction for the Coffee Association. We'll start with Senator CTAHR and his staff, followed by Representative Nicole Lowen, followed by Representative Capella. We've allocated approximately 7 minutes each. If anyone on the panel needs more time, please let us know. We want to be flexible and give everyone the chance to get their messages across. And if you need less time, that's fine too. We'll just move on to the next presenter. Following the legislators, and again, thank you for joining us this morning, will be an overview from Hawaii Department of Agriculture. That'll be followed by a presentation by PBARC, which is Pacific Basin Agriculture Research Center, which is a function of the United States Department of Agriculture. We'll follow that with a presentation from SHAC. SHAC is Synergistic Hawaii Agricultural Council. It's a organization that was founded by several commodities in Hawaii, primarily the coffee industry, the papaya industry, and the floriculture industry. HCA is a founding member of that organization, and the thinking of forming that was to join resources for a number of reasons, including accessing funding and executing various projects. We'll follow SHAC with University of Hawaii CTAHR. And after University of Hawaii, we will take HARC. That's Hawaii Agriculture Research Center. That will conclude the presentations, overviews part of the discussion. And then we'll move into the roundtable discussion, again, with members of the public. They will be able to submit written questions that I will ask of the panel. The audience, again, is the public, could include industry stakeholders, could include legislators, could be invited panelists that couldn't make it, but still want to participate. Also may include staffers of various agencies and or legislators. Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay, so Al, are you able to post the Coffee Association industry priorities?
Yes, give me 1 moment.
Also, just a reminder, if you're not speaking, please mute yourself. Okay, thank you. So these priorities are taken, developed from input from our members. The Hawaii Coffee Association is a statewide advocacy group. We, in many ways, are an umbrella organization for other organizations. Members of our board include the Maui Coffee Association, the KCFA, also research organizations like HARC also serves on our board, as well as SHAC. So there's some carryovers here. Some have been achieved. Others, are ongoing, recurring priorities. But I'll go through them real quick. Starting in 2019-2020 session, we had a bit of an interruption for COVID, but doesn't deter us from our overall goals. So we support coffee berry borer and coffee leaf rust control subsidy programs. Counterfeiting is a huge issue for the Hawaii coffee industry. One of our priorities is to add roasted products to the counterfeiting law, which is where we find most of the counterfeited coffee. Roasted coffee is not currently covered in that law. We like to support Hawaii Department of Agriculture on a variety of issues, including advocating for additional funding for the department. We support the 51% blend ratio legislation, depending on its form. And then moving into 21-22 session, coffee leaf rust is obviously our highest priority right now. Many of you participate in our semi-weekly calls. We have great attendance there. We've been doing that for about almost 40 weeks now. And a big priority there is streamlining the importation of rust-resistant varietals. And we found that quarantine facilities are a bottleneck there. We've been working with the department to try and address those bottlenecks. And we see two sides to that. One is public, where we advocate for improved state facilities on a permanent basis, and also working with the private sector to license, certify, partner with, et cetera, temporary quarantine facilities, because we just don't have the capacity in the state. And the department may get into that a bit more to come up with some interesting avenues for relieving some of those pressures. Amendments to the grade standards are also top of mind for green coffee. There was a rule that was put in place, a temporary rule in response to coffee berry borer that sunsetted about a year or more ago. So we need to revisit those grade standards and make them something that the entire industry is more amenable to. Part of that, a subset of that, is mandatory certification for green coffee. And the thinking there is that if the grade standards are more user-friendly, we could make mandatory certification possible and workable, and that may also help us with our counterfeiting issue and supporting traceability for green coffee. And another pressure is the capacity for commodity inspectors, especially in the more rural communities. They're harder to reach and more expensive to service. So we've been talking about licensing private third-party commodity inspectors for coffee as well, and that conversation continues. Another priority for the HCA is ozone treatments for importing coffee. Currently, methyl bromide is used. That's being phased out for a number of reasons. Ozone treatment is an alternative. The research is not in place quite yet to be able to move forward with permitting and infrastructure to advance that. Also, permitting and education for allowing producers to produce their own Bavaria Bassiana to fight coffee berry borer rather than purchase commercial products. This is done in other countries, and we want to alleviate some of the pressures and the costs there in fighting coffee berry borer by producing our own controls. There's a huge problem around labor shortage. This has been ongoing. We can discuss that a bit further. What are some of the drivers of that and some ways to alleviate those shortages? And more recently, we found some deficiencies in crop insurance programs as they relate to coffee leaf rust. So we've had some conversations with USDA risk management about how to address some of those shortcomings. So that's my intro. Thank you for your patience in listening to it. And I think we can move forward with Senator Drew Mamo Kanuha, if he's on. Morning, Senator.
Morning, Chris. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, welcome.
Okay, just mahalo to you and the Hawaii Coffee Association for organizing this pretty important forum for us. I think it's a good idea that we get everybody together and collaborate on and ultimately share ideas on the priorities that will help and move our coffee industry forward. I know many of you folks have been working on a lot of these issues for a very long time, and I think it's important for us to continue the conversations and ultimately, pass for us decent legislation that can help the issues. So I did want to bring up one of the, basically background. If you don't know me, Drew Kanuha, I represent Kona and West Ka'u. So pretty huge district, one of the second largest in the state. I am the current majority leader of the Senate. I sit on the committees of Ways and Means, Education, and Housing, and have introduced bills in the past, the last 3 years, with regards to coffee. I know some have been favorable, some have not been favorable, but I'm always here to listen. We try to sit with each and every one of you during all the meetings and hear what great ideas you have on how I can help, at least. So one of the measures that we passed this past year, or that we worked on, was the coffee leaf rust. And so, obviously it was identified in the state earlier on, and through the interagency weekly meetings convened by HCA, it was identified that CLR could be partially controlled by the timely application of certain fungicides. So as such, one of the bills that came out, and thanks to my colleagues on the House side, and especially Rep. Nicole Lowen for her early meetings with the coffee industry and identifying different ways of utilizing the monies available through Department of Agriculture, put some of the monies, or at least added monies to the current coffee berry borer legislation that the Rep. Lowen created a few years ago to help with the coffee berry borer issue. So number one was to extend the sunset date of the pesticide subsidy program and the program manager position for an additional 2 years. And number two, add CLR as an eligible reimbursable item to continue helping our farmers manage both CBB and CLR. So once it was signed by the governor, thanks DOE, there wasn't money appropriated to that, but HDOA had money to put into that fund, which was $300,000, which the county of Hawai'i is currently going through the process of accepting those monies. I think today is actually the council might be on the first reading or second reading of that acceptance. So after they finalize it, HDOA can further can provide further information about the timeline by which growers can expect reimbursements. So that's what we did this past session. And then we definitely going to work on ways for next session to continue that subsidy program and find the monies available. So that's also in the works. We're also going to be exploring the efficacy of fertilizers that would prevent the occurrence of CBB and CLR, and how to ensure farmers are able to afford preventative mitigative efforts. I know there was a move to try to put that in this past legislation, which didn't end up being in the final bill, but that's something that I think we can continue to work on to improve for next session. Another thing for next session, which you guys have been advocating for, was expanding state-owned quarantine facilities of the Department of Ag plant quarantine branch. You know, our recent experience with CLR has highlighted the fact that existing facilities don't have the capacity to deal with the demand for disease-resistant varietals. So, you know, last year I asked with Senate Resolution 194, it urged the DOA to expand its facilities, as well as apply for federal funding under the U.S. Department of Ag through its plant pest and disease management and the disaster prevention program and the National Clean Plant Network program under the authority of the Plant Protection Act. Try to say that 10 times fast. Act Section 7721 to increase screening and enforcement abilities throughout the state of Hawaii. So I'm definitely going to be supporting the Department of Ag's request for state funding to build a new biological control facility on Oahu, and ultimately expand more facilities to accommodate and safeguard coffee plants throughout, not only on Oahu, but throughout the state. Also going to be looking to improve guidelines for the certification of privately owned plant quarantine facilities, which the Coffee Association was advocating for. And also, try to figure out ways to, the biosecurity plan came out years ago. I definitely want to try to reassess and identify areas that we can improve, whether it's through funding or, we had a plan and it doesn't seem like a whole lot has been accomplished in the meantime, but I think that's something that we definitely need to improve upon to make sure that we can, try to at least not have so many invasive species coming to Hawaii that you can see not only devastate the coffee industry, but a whole bunch of different ag industries throughout the state. So that's going to be something really important that we need to look at and reassess. So we also, in the past, we've tried to improve labeling laws. Is something that I'm going to continue to do. I'm going to reintroduce one measure from the 2020 session, which extends the offense of false labeling of Hawaii grown coffee to include roasted coffee, and also look at ways that maybe we need to increase the penalty for violation of labeling laws. So these are just some of the few things. I don't want to take too much time. I know there's so many other great panelists here, and of course my colleagues on the House side that have a lot to contribute to this conversation, and definitely looking forward to the conversation at the end. But again, thank you so much for creating the space for the public to hear from everybody, and ultimately the experts in the coffee field and the farmers, that are doing it every single day. So, I'm definitely looking forward to the 2022 upcoming session, and really trying to focus on helping our ag industry and our coffee industry. But there's a lot of work to do, and but it's great to do this work with such passionate individuals and experienced individuals at that. So thanks, Chris, and looking forward to the good conversation.
Thank you, Senator. We appreciate your support and your leadership. Very important to have an advocate of your stature at the Capitol. Likewise with our next panelist, Representative Nicole Lowen. Good morning, Representative. How are you?
Good morning. How are you? Thanks for having us. So yeah, I'm Nicole Lowen, and I represent District 6 on the Big Island. So that is, part Drew's Senate district kind of encompasses part of my district and part of Rep. Capella's district, and I have the more north part. So mine goes from just a little bit north of the airport down to about Royal Poinciana, and then includes some coffee farms, in the Palani area and going up to Holualoa. So I also chair the Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection in the State House, and then I sit on the Committee on Judiciary and Hawaiian Affairs, and then also for the first time this past year, I sit on the Committee on Agriculture. So that's been interesting new set of issues to spend more time on directly. And like, as Drew mentioned, I think one of the primary things when I first ran for office in 2012 was when coffee berry borer had just been, was really in the news, had recently been identified and was really causing a problem to Kona coffee farmers. So I think we got some funding for that in 2013. That was my first session. And then in my second session, working with a group of people from the coffee industry on all sides, and with DOA at the time, we wrote and passed the bill that established the CBB subsidy program. And that's the same structure that we're using now to try to address coffee leaf rust, since that was already in place. Yeah, I think going into next session, so, we did have bills last session also. We had the, similar bill to the one that the Senate bill ultimately passed, but we had the same bill introduced in the House that I had worked on to get funding for the coffee leaf rust and add that to the subsidy program. And then we've had that same discussion with some of the Kona coffee farmers about their desire to add the fertilizer treatments to that. We did talk to Department of Agriculture, and I think there might be some issues with that. So we'll have to see if we can work through them. Sorry, I'm not quite as prepared as Drew is. I'm still drinking my coffee this morning. But yeah, I think going forward, I'm glad to see the support for the 51% labeling on this list. That's something I think we all support, and it would be nice to get that passed and maybe have some action on that front, and then be able to move forward with this group and other groups and have everyone working together on the same page. I think that looking at your list of priorities for the next session, definitely going back to looking at some of the green coffee standards and inspections, I think are really important. We can keep trying to address all these new invasive species and pests after the fact, after they arrive, but there's such a big issue. And it would be a lot better to try to stop them from getting here in the first place. So, as Drew mentioned, the biosecurity plan, which I think is still only a small percent of the proposals in there have been implemented. And I think, we need to keep advocating for getting full funding for the biosecurity plan, including that positions that includes in Department of Ag to do inspections and do some of this kind of work. That I think, I'm happy to answer questions. I am always happy to work with this group and hear what the needs are. And I know that we are planning on legislation. I've got to talk with my colleagues here so that we're not duplicating efforts, but I know that we're planning on legislation for next year to come in and request additional funding for the coffee leaf rust aspect of the CBB subsidy program, and then also to come back to the labeling question. But it looks like there's some other proposals in here that I don't have on my list of legislation. So it'd be interesting to see, like, if there's some language that is ready that we could get drafted into a bill, or if someone's office is already doing it. And then I guess I would just point out with the subsidy program that's in place, we have extended the sunset date, but it's still only a couple years out now. It's set to expire in 2023. So I think that's something for everyone to think about. What is the reasonable and date for that to sunset, and if we come back, should we try to push it a little further out, or is everyone ready for that to sunset in 2023? So that's something I would like to hear from everybody here about. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to further discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative. We appreciate you and your leadership. You've been very tenacious for the coffee industry. The CBB subsidy program was a milestone that in many ways, saved our industry. And transitioning that into coffee leaf rust controls is a big step in helping us sustain ourselves. We appreciate you and your leadership. Again, thank you for joining us. Before I introduce our next panelist, I just want to say, we've had similar events like this at the Capitol, and maybe we would have 30 people. COVID has taught us a lot of new skills, and we've got nearly 100 people between panelists and attendees, which is something that would be almost impossible to accommodate at the Capitol. So we're thankful for that. Our next guest panelist is Representative Capella. Representative, thank you for joining us. Would you care to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Chris, for having us and inviting me to be a part of this. And hello to everyone out there in Zoom land. Good morning. This is such an incredible opportunity. I'm trying to think about what I can talk about. It's hard to be the new person and to go last and to find different things to talk about. But I think just to echo some of the sentiments of my colleagues, we're all very much in agreement in finding ways to support to continue to support HCA, the coffee farmers and farmers across our state, but especially in Kona, protecting this incredible and iconic treasure that we have of Kona coffee. So I think I'll take a moment to introduce myself because I am new. My name is Janae Capella and I represent District 5. So I'm Nicole's neighbor. We meet up in Royal Point, Siana, and my district goes all the way out to Na'alehu. So I represent a large chunk of the coffee belt. I was born and raised on a coffee farm in Captain Cook, and I am a former Miss Kona Coffee. I'm proud to say that. I'm also a former board member for the Kona Coffee Farmers Association, along with a former board member for the Kona Coffee Cultural Festival, which I'm proud to say we just celebrated our 50th. In terms of legislation, we do need to meet with my colleagues on here to see exactly who's introducing what. So as Representative Lowen said, we're not duplicating pieces and measures, but working together to make sure that we can cover the entire the necessities that we need to cover. But some of the things that I'm incredibly passionate about that have already been mentioned, but I am planning on trying to introduce something on raising the minimum level of coffee. So I'm really glad to see that HCA supports the 51%. And I know that we've been working with the Kona Coffee Farmers Association on trying to use some of the language that was actually introduced by my predecessor, Representative Cregan. The last piece of legislation, I think that kind of touched on that 51% where people started to really get into agreement. So I'm glad we're having this conversation now. I think another thing that I'm really passionate about is trying to find ways to include some of the amending the pesticide subsidy program that has already been talked about, but trying to find a way to include fertilizers. We do have a lot of organic farmers that are represented here in Kona, and we need to find ways to support them as well. So if we can find a way to work with Department of Agriculture to make that happen, I think that that's really going to be a vital part of fighting the infestation and the spread of coffee leaf rust, is just protecting the tree health. One thing that hasn't been mentioned that was talked about in your folks' priorities is the labor shortage. And one thing that I am hopeful that we can have a conversation on is also how do we address the housing shortage? Because as we find workers, we need to be able to find a place to ensure that they have a safe space to live in, and addressing affordable housing for our farmers, for laborers and for workers, I think is really going to be an incredible part of ensuring that we have a healthy workforce to continue farming and to ensure that farmers can stay as farmers by having land and a roof over their head. So I'm excited to hopefully have a conversation on that as well. But I think my colleagues hit all of it, and I did get a chance to introduce myself. So I am really looking forward to working with you folks. I do have an open door policy. Please reach out. I'm brand new. This is my first legislative session, but I am really just excited to get to know all of you, all of the panelists, and the many participants that are joining us today. So looking forward to the conversation. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you. Very nicely stated. We appreciate you. We appreciate your energy, enthusiasm, and your experience in the coffee belt. So thank you for joining the conversation. I just want to note that we invited legislators from across the state, from all coffee producing origins on Oahu, Maui, and Kauai, as well as a number of our partners in DC. Some of them may not have been comfortable as panelists and are in the audience. So we would just want to thank them as well. All right, any questions so far from the panelists? Okay, we did post the Coffee Association industry priorities as a PDF in the chat. Feel free to download that for your use and information. If we can move on, please, to Hawaii Department of Agriculture. Chair Shimabukuro Geyser. Good morning.
Hi, Chris. I'm in between meetings, so I apologize. Things came up since I registered, and I don't have good access to video. So I want to turn it over to Dr. Helmuth Rogue, to do the presentation for the department. And if there's any questions later, I will be jumping in and out intermittently, and I'll work with the staff to get back any comments to what's presented. And yes, we want to work with the industry, both conventional and organic, to provide the best support possible based on good science and fact-based data. Okay, so I'll turn it over. Helmuth, do you want to do the presentation? And thank you for including us.
Thank you, Phyllis, and thank you for making your staff leaders available, not just today, but in our semi-weekly calls. You folks have been incredibly responsive and communicative, and we don't know where we'd be without you. So thank you so much.
So good morning. This is Helmut Rock. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. So the camera is off, but that's fine. We're good with this. And thank you for the opportunity. I'm Helmut Rock. I'm the administrator of Plant Industry Division here with the Department of Agriculture. We're still trying to figure out. We're in a different conference room here this morning. So, and thank you, Chair Phyllis gave us an introduction here. And what I wanted to say is, actually, Senator Kanuha already gave our presentation this morning because he talked about most of the items we wanted to talk about. One is the CVB CLR subsidy program. And the Senator mentioned that we just recently approved additional $300,000 to the program to add to the existing subsidy program. And we're a little held up in the county currently, but there, as the Senator mentioned, I think they have a discussion today to approve the additional funding. So we are very close to rolling out the additional dollars. And as Senator Kanuha also mentioned, obviously we have to wait until the next legislative session to find out in which capacity we can continue the current subsidy program. In addition to the subsidy program, I wanted to mention that we also fund outreach work that UH Extension, and Andrea is on there and will probably talk right after us, that we fund. This is outreach to work on the coffee leaf rust extension work. So we put in over $61,000 for that work. The second topic I wanted to mention, and that came out, we want to get in a little bit more detail, is the what I call the offshore resistant variety program. As you know, there are two laws currently regulating the import of coffee plants and coffee material to Hawaii. One is on the federal side that does not allow import from overseas directly to Puerto Rico and Hawaii. And then there's the state law that does not allow import of coffee plant material from the continental US and Puerto Rico to Hawaii directly. So this is regulated. And the reason behind these regulations is because we want to protect our industry from import of accidental transport of plant pests that affect coffee. So when we talk to our industry here, we suggested a program to do all the work of selecting resistant varieties or any of the varieties the industry is interested in, to do that offshore. That would be the safest way to make sure to mitigate the risk of accidentally importing new pests. We have one of the worst already here, coffee berry borer and coffee leaf rust, but believe me, there's a lot more out there that could come to Hawaii and impact our industry. So I have Darcy Ohishi here, my biocontrol expert and acting manager for the plant pest program. He can go a little bit in more details about the offshore resistant variety program. So Darcy, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for organizing this, Chris. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to the industry about these issues. So this offshore program that the department is looking at is basically to create a safe portal to allow varieties to come in and create a pathway into Hawaii for legal introduction of coffee plant material for planting. So what we're looking at is creating a variety of compliance agreements first, we need to identify the kinds of varieties that people would like to get, where to get them from, and creating a pathway by which they can be first introduced into the continental US, grown out, and then create a propagation system, a vegetative propagation system, which could allow us to then screen for diseases and import into Hawaii. With that importation, we can make some changes into our quarantine system to allow a more expeditious release from quarantine. So we need a few things to move this forward, which is from the industry would be a shift from seed-based propagation over to vegetative, which would include tissue culture, micropropagation, et cetera. Obviously, the identification of the varieties that you're interested in, and then how plants would be distributed too. So would this be grass? Would we be, what kind of propagules is the industry really interested in? And we're working to identify what varieties are currently available in the continental US, which any assistance from the industry in this regard would be greatly appreciated. And an important portion of this would be really creating a steering committee to work with the department and our regulators and researchers to identify how best to move this program forward. And once we have some of these questions answered, we can create a rough timeline for how this would look. So that's the real broad picture, which is basically, again, compliance agreements to ensure things coming in from foreign are clean and safe, that they meet the federal requirements in terms of not being a direct import from foreign sources into Hawaii, and then creating a portal from through third-party cooperative agreements into Hawaii that can expedite the introduction of desired coffee material into Hawaii for planting.
All right, well, thank you, Darcy. And I want to stress, so we are working already with our federal counterpart, USDA APHIS PPQ, on the import regulation from overseas to the continental US of coffee material, because that's regulated by the federal government. And we are figuring out with our federal counterpart what the sort of, and you don't see me making the air quotes, the naturalization process is. And this is the timeline Darcy was talking about. How long does, and how many generations or whatever that is, the coffee has to be in the continental US before it is considered basically a import, a domestic import from the continental US to Hawaii. So we're working with our federal counterparts. Darcy's in contact with the Clean Plant Network in Florida and California, with researchers over there to figure out what options we have on the continent to get this program going. And the advantage would be, we would, if we have assured that clean material can come from the continental US to Hawaii, we can basically then, under compliance agreement, as Darcy mentioned, bypass sort of the 1 year quarantine time that is required here in Hawaii, and the material could go straight into the field. So that's ideal, and we're working on the process timeline, and we're working with you as the industry, where we could get the varieties and all that stuff. So it's a cooperative effort, and hopefully we can get to some clear results here very soon. The other topic that was mentioned was the facilities. Yes, the department has limited capacity, and by law, we can certify private facilities. That has to go through the Board of Agriculture. They have to approve if a private facility follows the standards of being a quarantine facility and could house that material that comes in. So this would be an option B. Option A, in our opinion, is to keep any risk offshore and do it on the continental US before we bring clean plants into Hawaii. So the last point I wanted to make was about the pesticide program. Our pesticide branch continues working with the researcher, with the chemical registrants, excuse me, and also with the distributors to ensure that the product that our coffee industry has shown interest in, like ProBlood Verde, will be processed with as little review time as possible, while still providing accurate review and assessment for any potential negative impacts of that chemical. We will also ask the industry to move towards the section 18, emergency exemption request, whatever product that may be. So currently, as you know, Prioxor has slightly been used thus far. So we're assuming the industry would like a different product for the section 18 exemption. If that's going to be a new product that will be requested. The industry will need to work towards providing us with similar information that we have received for prior source. So we're certainly willing, and we're working on that and trying to help as much as we can to expedite the process of getting the exemptions done or products labeled for the right purpose so we can use that. That's what we wanted to present from the Hawaii Department of Agriculture, and thank you again for the opportunity, Chris, and your organization and everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Helmuth and Darcy. For those members of the audience and the panel that don't know, we've been meeting since the discovery of coffee leaf rust. We started out weekly, having weekly conference calls among researchers and regulators and industry stakeholders across the state. And as time went on and we were able to achieve certain milestones, we cut that back to every other week, and those calls are continuing. A number of the panelists have been regular attendees to those calls, and the department has been outstanding in their communication, leadership, execution, and accountability to addressing coffee leaf rust. It's a tough go. It's a tough problem, but we hit the ground running, and we're pretty pleased with the progress. But there's a lot more work to do. So we want to thank all the members of the department and the entire staff for their responsiveness to this important issue. Okay, if we could move on to PBARC, Pacific Basin Agriculture Research Center. Who would like to go first?
Hey, Chris, I'm going to give a presentation for PBARC. I'm going to share my screen.
Thank you, Marissa. Good morning.
That's okay. Good morning. Okay, can everybody see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. So good morning, everybody. I am Marissa Wall. I am the director of the Pacific Basin Agricultural Research Center. We are part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's in-house research agency. And we have been doing research on coffee probably maybe 15 years now, but certainly the last 10 years, our effort has just grown tremendously. We have probably about half of our scientists at this point in time working on coffee in some area, starting with our research leader of our plant group, Tracy Matsumoto. She's a horticulturalist, and she was one of our first scientists to actually start working on coffee, developing methods to sort of synchronize coffee flowering for a concentrated harvest. We also have Roxana Myers, who is a research plant pathologist specializing in nematology, which is an important pest of coffee, especially here on the Big Island. Lisa Keith, who's on our panel today with us, is a research plant pathologist. She's leading our team on the coffee leaf rust effort. Nick Manukas is a research leader of our entomology group. He's a research biologist, and he was our lead scientist on the coffee berry borer area-wide IPM program. Peter Follett is a research entomologist, also a quarantine entomologist, but he is leading our biocontrol efforts with coffee berry borer. Melissa Johnson is a research biologist, and she is our only scientist that is 100% focused on coffee. We did receive new funding, maybe 8 years ago, to specifically fund a position focused on coffee. And she's been working, of course, on coffee berry borer and coffee leaf rust. In my lab, we work on coffee quality. We have both the chemistry as well as a trained cupping panel. And then we just hired 2 new scientists who may work on some aspect of coffee. Pei-Shi Liang is a research ag engineer, and Shu Sun is a research food technologist. And we're in the process of onboarding a new research geneticist, again, focusing on coffee genetics. So I'm going to briefly just give you an overview of what the scientists are currently working on. Tracy Matsumoto is our acting curator as well of our tropical germplasm repository. And a few years ago, we did get new base money to start coffee germplasm collection at PBARC. And this is the only federal collection of coffee. Anything that we establish here will have a core backup collection in Puerto Rico. We have scientists back on the East Coast that are genotyping all of the material that we intend to put into the collection so that we know the genetic identity of everything we have. Of course, we have a very small quarantine house, if you will, that we use to bring in material into quarantine before we can put it out even in our own fields here. And then we are also working with HARC because they have a long-term coffee breeding program, and they have a lot of germplasm, and we are going to put that into our collection so that it'll be protected and maintained in perpetuity. And I'm happy to say that the first, I guess it was about 75 accessions of coffee germplasm from HARC are now planted in our field at PBARC, and we're probably going to have hundreds of coffee germplasm accessions when we're done. And all of our collection will be backed up through seed for long-term storage at our facility in Fort Collins, Colorado. So Tracy has also been working with HARC and the World Coffee Research Organization to test a number of varieties. Really, they're testing them around the world. And this started out before coffee leaf rust came into Hawaii. The original plan was to test these varieties on Kauai to see how they did in Hawaii. But, and Tracy has worked to bring in all of this material again through quarantine. It's just come out of quarantine and now it's into propagation. But as a result of coffee leaf rust, we're now going to have trials on Maui and the Big Island. So we need to produce enough material through tissue culture so that we can plant at these 3 locations. I think it probably will be about a year from now when the fields are actually planted. And in addition to that, we're working with the broader group, again, to bring in other material that might be of use to Hawaii. Again, everything that we bring in is going to be genotyped by our ARS facility in Beltsville, Maryland. And we're also working directly with some of the breeders of some of this material to make sure that we'll ultimately have permission to plant it commercially. Okay, so Roxana is our nematologist, and you may be aware that the Kona typica is highly susceptible to the Kona coffee root knot nematode, right? And so the way we control for that is to graft onto a nematode tolerant rootstock. And Roxanne has done a lot of work to identify nematode tolerant rootstocks. And now her role is going to be to look at any of the coffee leaf rust resistant material that we identify to see if it has nematode tolerance or resistance as well. If it does, that's great. If it doesn't, we know that we're going to need to graft those varieties onto nematode tolerant rootstocks. And then, of course, she also is working on a number of other ways to control nematodes in the field, whether that's through cultural practices, biological controls, soil amendments. And then Lisa, of course, is our plant pathologist and really focused right now on coffee leaf rust, both understanding the pathogenicity of the pathogen, the fungus in our environment, the disease cycle, the biology, are there any natural enemies out there? She is working with Tracy and Roxana on identifying the resistant varieties and screening those right now. And she has developed a number of visual aids. She's developed molecular methods for early disease detection. And she also helped us develop some coffee leaf rust sanitation protocols so that we could enter and exit fields that have coffee leaf rust without moving it around. And then she is involved in screening a number of fungicides, both in the lab, in growth chambers, and then ultimately in the field for managing coffee leaf rust. Then Melissa Johnson, as I said, is our only scientist that was 100% assigned to work on coffee. She is also working on coffee leaf rust. She's in the field conducting surveys to estimate the incidence and severity on managed coffee farms. She's looking at quantifying the spore load and understanding how the spores may move around through wind dispersal, tying those things in with weather, both at the landscape and the microplot level. And that's information that Lisa will be able to use to help us predict when we may have outbreaks of CLR and to better time the applications of fungicides. And then she's also going to be looking at other management practices for CLR, such as pruning, sanitation, and fertilization regimes. And then we still do work on coffee berry borer. I think for about 10 years, we had this area-wide IPM program for coffee berry borer. It was a huge effort. We learned a lot. I think the growers understand how to manage coffee berry borer now, but the research continues. And Melissa is looking right now in how we can do post-harvest ground and tree sanitation, characterizing the CBB flight, understanding when it flies and how the weather influences that, and then possibly looking at different types of ground covers and the soil plant health relationship so that we can actually increase the rate of CBB the coffee raisin decomposition when the raisins fall to the ground. Peter Follett is our research entomologist. He's been working on coffee berry borer control. We still have our team, Lisa, Tracy, and Melissa, all working with the Bavaria, which is still one of our main methods of biocontrol for coffee berry borer. But Peter came up with this predator breeding station using flat bark beetles so that we can actually reproduce flat bark beetles in the field. They feed on CBB that is in raisins, so sort of a little bit of a cleanup crew, if you will. But in the longer term, we're working to bring in this parasitic wasp, which is a natural parasite of CBB. Done all the host specificity testing to show that this wasp is specific just to CBB. It's not going to attack any of our native beetles. And we're working on getting all the permits that we need to actually mass rear and release this. Whoop. Okay, and then finally, Dr. Nick Manukas, who again was our lead for our area-wide program, has been working to develop a decision support tool for our growers. It's called the Best Beans app. And this is going to sort of wrap up all of the monitoring information, our weather data, into a decision support tool. It can be downloaded on the the App Store and Android. So right onto your smartphone. We are in the process of testing it right now, and we expect the next season it'll be really ready for growers to use. But right now we're asking growers to download the app and work with us to test it so that we can really optimize it for their use. And we'll have CBB answer available through that app. We are working with Smart Yields, which is a commercial company. We have an agreement with them to sort of support the further development of the app and to support the long-term availability of the app. Okay, so that is all areas that PBARC is working on. I really want to thank you for all of our great collaboration. Of course, many of the problems the industry face cannot be solved necessarily with science or research, but to the extent they can, we're here to help and really value the interaction that we've had both with the industry, HDOA, CTAHR, SHAC, and HARC. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marissa. That was excellent. And thank you to all of your team leaders and your staff. Amazing work that you're doing there. That app is particularly interesting. I think there's a lot of potential there. We're doing perfect on time. And if I could, I'd like to call on Suzanne Schreiner of Synergistic Hawaii Agricultural Council. Suzanne.
Hi, Chris, I'm here. I'm sharing my screen for you.
Thank you.
So SHAC is a consortium, as Chris introduced us, with the membership of Hawaii coffee, papaya, and floriculture industries. And we really came together in 2009 to, in the height of the recession, to find a way to support diversified ag in Hawaii, remove the economic barriers we face as Hawaii growers, and expand our markets. And we focus on USDA level grants. We're a cooperator with USDA. And over time, we found that some of the biggest economic barriers we face are things like coffee berry borer and coffee leaf rust. So with that in mind, we've pursued grants over the years to support our industry. Here's our membership structure, just so you understand a little bit about us. We have two board members. We have two board members from HCA, Madeline Lagoria Garcia and Ralph Gaston, both active in the communities here in Kona and Ka'u. And we have several staff members, myself, we have financial staff. We keep Luis Aristizabal, a scientist, on staff with us, and a number of other people to help us keep our programs running. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but Hawaii coffee is incredibly important within the state. We have 150 million in estimated roasted valuation between all our farms. Now, that number was come up with between conversations with HCA, SHAC, and various economic professionals around the state. But what that turns into at the end of it is probably about 450 million in valuation when you factor how it circulates through the community in jobs, in cafes, in ag tourism. So we need to protect this value. And now that coffee leaf rust is found on every island, we probably have close to 99% of our farms impacted at this stage. SHAC and HCA had discussions early on in the year to swing for a big grant. So we applied for earlier this year a specialty crop research initiative grant, that's SCRI, and it's a coordinated approach to CLR, which means it's a multi-state, multi-year grant. We have 9 consortium members. That includes ARS PBARC, ARS Puerto Rico in their Tropical Ag Research Station, University of Puerto Rico, Purdue University, Michigan State, and SHAC. And this is a $6 million grant. It runs through December of 2025. And we have immediate goals and long-term goals under the grant because we realize growers need immediate help, but we also need long-term solutions. So we're looking at it from all angles. And a big part of this grant is extension, is getting information out to our growers. And that first objective, Marisa covered this a little bit with the field trials that Tracy Matsumoto is doing. These trials will be based out of Hilo, but will also be on farms across the state. We're going to look closely at the management practices in the field versus the phenology. If we fertilize this way, how does the bean size end up, for example? And at the end of this, cupping trials are going to be one of the most important aspects of it because we know any new varieties have to meet the Hawai'i standard for flavor. We can't degrade our market. We need to keep that cup high. So part of this is clonal propagation of varieties. And I think it's really important I touch on clonal propagation because as a grower, I've already been handed seeds from various trees that are allegedly rust resistant. And if I take that seed and plant it, the way it works with rust resistance being bred into a tree is you maybe have a 1 in 4 chance that the tree you grow from that seed is actually rust resistant. So be very hesitant to take seeds from anybody who says they have rust resistant seeds. It's scientifically, really, clonal propagation is the best way to get a clean seed. These products aren't true to seed. So just be aware of that. I know there's things floating around the community. Be careful with the seeds you accept. And of course, Roxana doing the root knot nematode, we know that's a huge issue here on the Big Island. The second aspect, Melissa Johnson, Luis Aristizabal, and counterparts in Puerto Rico are going to be looking on farm what is happening with our rust infections. They're going to document the management practices, what farmers are doing with fertilizers and fungicides, and try and really dial in the data to help develop an IPM based on actual field events. Secondary to this is applied research on these issues. So we're going to have some standalone soil health trials to find out nutritional data. We know that's hugely important for our non-resistant trees, trials of pruning and suckering methods, and looking at a wide range of research that will help us. And these are short-term goals. Varieties, of course, are long-term goals, but as a grower of Typica myself, we need the answers to these questions now. We know you do. We know I do. So we're going to try and get that rolling as soon as possible. Also part of that is fungicide trials, both in the lab and greenhouse through UH. And if we find products that work, we're going to pursue local needs permits through US EPA and HDOA to get these labeled if possible. And something interesting that Puerto Rico has been working on for a number of years is a fungus that actually attacks coffee leaf rust, and that's Lecanicilium. So if you think of how Bovaria attacks our CBB, Lecanicilium has an effect on coffee leaf rust. We're not sure how much of an effect. We're not sure if it's effective at actually controlling CLR. And so they're going to study what mix and what conditions favor Lecanicilium infections attacking rust. So hopefully that'll yield some good news over the long run. Now, some very basic research as opposed to field research is funding will provided to Purdue University, who is the global leader on investigating coffee leaf rust fungus itself. They're going to do DNA work and genomic work to figure out how CLR crossbreeds, whether it reproduces sexually, whether it recombines naturally. And this is a big concern right now. We know we have the Mexican, there's over 50 varieties of CLR. We know we have the Mexican variety here. If we were to get a Costa Rican variety, are they going to combine, create a third variety? What will that do for our cultivar breeding? There's a lot of questions that still haven't been answered about CLR. So we're hoping Purdue can help us get those answers. Second aspect that will be done in Puerto Rico is they will be sequencing the RNA in both Typica and CLR resistant plants to see if they can track down the gene that makes a resistant plant resistant to the CLR infection. So once again, this is a long-term opportunity to improve our breeding and perhaps find a way to protect our Typica if that turns out to be possible. The fifth aspect of this is an economic overview. We are bringing in Michigan State here to Hawaii and to Puerto Rico to look at the potential economic losses for CLR and the cost benefit of our control strategies. Over the long run, how much is it going to cost to maintain an IPM for our non-resistant varieties of Typica or Katura, Katui, versus replanting? These are big questions for growers. We also need to look at the market side. What will the market accept if we bring in a new variety? How is the marketplace going to accept that from a Hawaiian coffee? So big overarching questions that we hope the economists can answer for us. And the last slide I wanted to give you is a slide from World Coffee Research. On the left side, you see Typica grown in Brazil that is not rust resistant. And on the right, you see rust resistant plants that have been bred. And I think as we drive through our fields right now here in Kona, we see a lot of coffee that looks like the coffee on the left. I know it's shocking. It's something we're all struggling to find a way forward, but I feel strongly that the grants that are coming in and the science that's being done through ARS will give us a path. Thank you for your time and your plans.
Thank you, Suzanne. I think one of the most important things that HCA has done is aid with the formation of SHAC. And one of the best things that SHAC has ever done was name you their administrator. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much. Well done. A lot of great, important work there. If we could move on to University of Hawaii, College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources.
Hi, Chris. I think I can start. This is Julie Coughlin. I'm with the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I lead the IR4 project in Hawaii and have served as the IR4 field research director for over 30 years. And I'm also Hawaii's IR4 state liaison representative. My role as your IR4 rep is to help Hawaii's farmers gain access to conventional and bio-based pesticides. We conduct field residue trials and subsequent laboratory analysis for pesticide residues on our crops, as well as conducting crop safety and efficacy trials. All of these data are needed to obtain new pesticide registrations. So IR4 is national in scope. The program is divided into 4 regions, and each year the regions meet to prioritize their projects for funding. So the IR4 project has been very supportive of our coffee leaf rust needs and has funded all of the projects I nominated for systemic fungicides to control coffee leaf rust. IR4 also supports our coffee industry by tracking international residue trials in coffee through the Minor Use Foundation. The focus of the foundation is to implement research around the globe to harmonize global residue tolerances. And so the foundation's work in coffee helps to break down ag trade barriers resulting from a misalignment of residue tolerances. Over the years, we've conducted numerous projects to register pesticides in Hawaii's crops. And we work on registration of herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, and we also have projects targeting nematodes. And we do a lot of work in coffee because it's our #2 crop. Some of the pesticide products we've registered in coffee through the IR4 program include Movento, Admire Pro, and Applaud for greenscale and mealybugs, Delegate, Exirel, and Pyrethrins plus PBO products for coffee berry borer, Fusilade, Gold, and Allion for weed control. And we have several projects that we're working on right now that are working through the registration pipeline at IR4. And these include Savanto for greenscale, Brigade and Avant for coffee berry borer, Vellum Prime for nematodes, and Rely, Loyant, and Amine 400 for weeds. So we have been actively working on conventional fungicides to control coffee leaf rust. We initiated trials to register Quadris Extra in 2017 as a preemptive strategy for coffee leaf rust. We wanted to have a systemic fungicide available for the growers when coffee leaf rust arrived in the islands. Unfortunately, this product is not registered yet. It had some delays. We lost a couple of trials in Puerto Rico due to Hurricane Maria, and we had some lab delays due to COVID closures. But right as of now, all the field work and lab work has been completed, and IR4 has written the tolerance petition, and it should be submitted to EPA sometime soon. IR4 also funded 2 field efficacy and crop safety trials in Hawaii and Puerto Rico this year to screen potential fungicide products to control coffee leaf rust. Both field trials are completed, and both trials we found very promising results with all of the products tested. So IR4 has provided funding to repeat these trials during the 2022 season next year. And the products included in these trials are Quadris Extra, Approach Prima, Apruvia Top, Preaxorzemium, Excalia, Pyrazoflumid, and Dithane. And we will be conducting field residue trials for Approach Prima in 2022. Also in progress is efficacy and crop safety trial, looking at fungicides for coffee anthracnose. And the products to be tested in these trials are Cueva, Oso, Apruvia Top, Kinja, and Approach Prima. And that's a brief overview of our pesticide registration work in coffee. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. We appreciate you very much.
You're welcome.
Hi, Chris. This is
Hi,
Andrea. Hi. Thank you
Morning.
so much for this opportunity to provide an overview of outreach and extension from CTAHR. I'm going to shut off my video for now because I've got really bad bandwidth and I don't want it to be really choppy when I speak. But anyway, my name is Andrea Kawabata, and I'm an extension agent that works with the commercial coffee growers statewide, as well as the tropical fruit and nut growers in West Hawaii. Basically, I provide outreach and education to these major industries. And I also seek grant funding. And as time, funding, and manpower permits, I also can conduct applied research to support the industry. For the past 10 years, just to give a little history, Stuart, who is also on this call, myself as well as others have created and updated a successful Hawaii IPM for CBB management. And we now turn our focus on to CLR. My staff, Matt, who is grant funded completely, he is not permanent staff, but grant funded. He and I have hosted and co-hosted workshops, webinars, field days, and farm visits to address CBB, CLR, sampling and monitoring, spraying and pruning for CLR and CBB, coffee root knot nematode, anthracnose, and other coffee pests and problems. And we host a lot of this information along with CLR info at my hawaiicoffeeed.com website. We've also translated these materials into Spanish, Ilocano, and Tagalog to accommodate those who do not have English as their first language. Currently, Extension is working on a CLR best management practices document, working with industry as well as RMA for crop insurance changes for tree replacement and enhancement. We're working on educational events for this coming year. And we have created an industry and CLR survey that we hope to have provided to the industry for their feedback soon. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the following folks for their CLR outreach funding. And that includes USDA NIFA, the Western Extension Risk Management Education Center, the Hawaii Department of Agriculture, the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, the Hawaii Coffee Association, Hawaii Coffee Growers Association, Maui Coffee Association, and the United Ka'u Farmers Cooperative. This January, my program will also receive about 7% of the $6 million from the USDA SCRI grant funding. And although many of you may not understand this, one of our biggest challenges for supporting the coffee industry has been and continues to be a lack of permanent Kona Extension and Kona research support staff. But even through this, we look forward to the coming season, and we hope that folks will spread the word about our upcoming survey and outreach events. And with that, I thank you all.
Thank you, Andrea. We don't know where it would be without you. Anyone else from university? Okay, if we could move on to Tyler Jones of Hawaii Agricultural Research Center. Good morning, Tyler. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Let me get my screen shared here. Okay, so I kind of similarly to some other folks will give you a brief introduction of the organization and then our staff, and then also what we're doing as it relates to coffee leaf rust. Okay, and so this is the primary team members of our leadership team, at least of the coffee team. And so I think most of you probably know Dr. Nagai. She is technically retired, but I think she retired just before CLR hit. So we are fortunate enough that she's staying on to help us with this project. And then Dr. Wang, Ming Li Wang, she is our senior scientist that is, still working with us full-time, overseeing it. And then we're very fortunate to be able to hire a new postdoc, Dr. Aoki, and she's really running a lot of the nuts and bolts day-to-day operations. So, and we are very thankful to be able to get some financial support from USDA PBARC to be able to hire Dr. Aoki and to support these efforts. Just to familiarize you guys a little bit, you folks a little bit, we have really two primary farms, experiment stations. One is on the windward side of Oahu. It's a very wet environment. We have coffee leaf rust here. And our other one, we do have a small amount of coffee at this area. We're surrounded by wild coffee, but a lot of our most interesting germplasm that I will talk to you about is actually at our Kunia farm. And Dr. Aoki has been instrumental in putting in a very strict quarantine between the two farms that fortunately to date has enabled us to keep the Kunia farm free of leaf rust. We know that that probably won't last forever, but the more time we have to be able to propagate some of these important varieties or is good. So we're very happy that we've been able to keep it that way. So related to that, this is all plants at our Kunia farm. This is work that Dr. Nagai Shifumi started in actually 1999. I think she had quite a bit of insight to understand that it was only a matter of time before CLR came to Hawaii. And this was funded by the HCGA, mostly privately funded. And basically what she did was she took some resistant Catamora varieties and crossed them with some of the most important commercially grown varieties in Hawaii. So that includes 3 different types of Typica, a few red Cartiers, yellow, and you can see the list. And what her insight there was, yes, owing to the genetics of the resistance, we can pass on, because they are predominantly dominant genes, we can pass on the resistance from the Catimores to these varieties that are already grown here. And from that, we have a population of, it's approximately 470 trees made up of 37 different F1 hybrid families. And I think there's a few benefits to continuing this work, one of which is the growers are more familiar with the agronomic traits of these commercially grown varieties versus, bringing in varieties, people will have to, might have to relearn some things. And then also it would potentially allow us to have proprietary Hawaii varieties, right, that aren't grown anywhere else in the world. So having something that is unique, I think does have a, potential at least for adding value and marketing to our industry. So unfortunately, this work was only funded for a few years. HARC supported keeping the plants alive. And now what we're doing is going back to these F1s and trying to select some of the better ones and to distribute those to some test sites around the state. And so basically they've done self-pollinations of 14 of those F1s to create an F2. The reason we are part of the reason we're pursuing an F2 route is we think that there could potentially be better cupping qualities. And so we are collecting the seed from those this year, and we will be cupping some of them. And then we will also we're working on a plan to get some of those out to some farmers so that they can test them on site. In addition to that, we are working with PBARC to do a bioassay. So any of the seed from these varieties that we grow out before we send them off to farmers to plant, they would go through the bioassay at PBARC to confirm that they're resistant under those conditions. And so just to kind of summarize, what we're trying to do is make unique Hawaii proprietary varieties that are resistant to rust, and hopefully have more agronomic qualities that the farmers are used to. In addition to that, we also think that importing new varieties is also an avenue that we should pursue. Because of the importance of this problem, we think that we should pursue, like I said, multiple options. And one of the ways that HARC could potentially help in that, as they've discussed with the Clean Plant Network, it would be vegetative vegetatively propagated plants. And HARC has a very long history of working with the private sector to produce plantlets from tissue culture at scale. So it depends on the year, but we regularly produce 50 to maybe even 70,000 sugarcane seedlings a year that go back to the industry in Louisiana. And so we have a long history, and we've done that for 20 plus years. And so we have a staff, we have folks that are, well-trained, and we also have the facilities. And the good news about that is that the facilities are underutilized. And so you can kind of see, these are very specialized facilities. They're essentially sterile rooms with, very specific types of lighting and infrastructure to make it happen. So we have that, and we have that ready to go in case that, depending on how the modified quarantine works out, this would be available essentially at a moment's notice to bring in, plantlets at scale through tissue culture. The last thing that we're also working on is field grafting. And basically what this does is you can stump your trees, which most places are doing for CVB control already. And then once the shoots regrow, after you stump them, they regrow very bushy. And then typically people will select 3 or 4 nice leaders, such as this one. And so what this would allow you to do is graft onto these leaders the rust-resistant varieties. And the nice thing about that is, well, there's a few nice things. One of the things is, particularly in the Kona area, the cost to remove an existing orchard and just get it ready to plant is very high due to the nature of the soil and geology there. And also the rootstock resistant nematode, the nematode resistant rootstock that they already have in place, you would be able to take advantage of that as well. So I think,
okay, we're here.
Oops, sorry. I think as a research organization such as HARC, where our focus really is more in applied research, so that we can either develop or import technology to allow farmers to have a choice in what they want to do, and to determine what works best for them, because we all know we have quite a bit of geographic and ecological variance in our farms around the state, and what works best in one area might not be the best in the others. And so that's kind of our focus, really, is what can we do, develop, import, demonstrate, so that farmers have the ability to make choice that works the best for them at their farm. And that's it.
Thank you, Tyler. Nicely done. We appreciate Safumi and welcome the next generation of researchers at HARC. We appreciate your leadership as well.
And then, so I do want to admit, he's not going to present, but Dr. Osgood is our former director of research, and he is will be on the round panel with us, and he is a wealth of knowledge. So I hope I'm very excited that he's here and help provide some insight.
Yes, we are familiar with him. Thank you. Okay, so that basically concludes our presentation side of the event. A number of folks have been typing questions already. We appreciate those. But I want to remind everyone that the purpose of the event is to give overviews of various researchers, regulators, things that they've done, what they can do, what their capacities are, where they're deficient. And while we have legislators here with us, turn to the priorities which have been developed over time from stakeholders across the state. Those priorities have been developed with our board of directors, which is made up of industry leaders statewide. I also want to take a moment to thank and introduce our government affairs chairperson, Kimo Falconer. Many of you know Kimo. He's a large grower on Maui, and he's also the president of the Hawaii Coffee Growers Association. So go ahead, Kimo.
Nothing to add, but thank you for the introduction, and I really appreciate this forum. Been very informative, and I'm really excited about all the participation. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to remind folks about your questions. I see, questions about equipment and specific situations that you may have on your farm. I don't want to try and get to those, but as I said, I want to try and stay focused on our overall priorities and take advantage of having legislators here, along with industry stakeholders, researchers, regulators, et cetera. So, one that comes to mind and has been sort of top of mind for us, in addition to leaf rust, which we're working on constantly, is this labor shortage. And, CTAHR stands for College of Tropical Ag and Human Resources. So I guess my question for CTAHR is, to what extent can we help educate the community on what programs might be available for guest workers? Can we work together to identify where there are deficiencies and potentially come up with legislation and or funding to help relieve some of that pressure? How do we start that?
Hi, Chris, this is Andrea. I'm not sure the human resources side of CTAHR relates to that part. I think the human resources is related more to 4-H programs, smart fashion and design, and other parts of the college. But I'm happy to try and brainstorm and see if there's anything that CTAHR could do to help support this effort and challenges of labor shortage.
Thanks. Yeah, we understand there's a number of programs that are available, and I think a big part of that may be a lack of education. If we identify some of what the deficiencies are and programs that are available and improvements that can be made, can the college help us communicate?
Yeah, sure. Definitely knowing what the bottlenecks are and what the challenges are will help us better to get that information out and to help educate the growers. So yes, let's talk about that. Sure.
Okay, thanks. Another question I have is, how do we move forward on and this is a two-part question because they're both sort of related, for research and permitting. One is the supporting the ability to propagate local Bavaria strains that are effective in combating coffee berry borer. And likewise, researching and permitting the use of ozone for fumigation. I think that's probably a question for a number of people on the call: Department of Ag, PBARC on the research side, and also the university. Anyone want to address that at all?
Hi, Chris. This is Darcy and Helmuth. Greg isn't on the line, but we can double check with him about the local propagation of Bavaria and get back to you.
Okay, and I think there's an issue about isolating the right strains.
Correct. That's also my understanding. That's part of the issues. Yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone and this is going to be I think a number of folks on the call. I mean, I think the permitting falls under EPA. So
That's
does
correct.
anyone familiar with the pathways there?
I'm not familiar with the pathway, but I do know that EPA would have to get involved because you're concentrating what could be considered a pathogen. So I don't know, Lisa, do you have any insight on that? I think that question came up early on when we were starting to work with Bavaria and local strains.
Yes, definitely. That seems to be a long and expensive process. Definitely possible, but it will be challenging. And again, that's the regulatory side. I guess just to give a bit of background information of some of the research that has been conducted, particularly with the expert Dr. Stephen Raitt with ARS. He has since retired, but with the collection, a very large collection of local isolates of Bavaria strains, and then a genetic characterization to understand what was actually here and present. But I think there's still the necessary research really to look at the key components that make a good biocontrol strain. So its ease of producing high quantities of it, also understanding the overall virulence, how well does it actually attack, and its persistence in the natural environment. Some of the previous research has shown that the local strains, it really depended on the location and the microclimates as far as what type of success was being seen. And the GHA strain, really with such extensive decades and decades of research, it is easy to grow. It remains pretty virulent, and the persistence as far as essentially, the capacity to have the product, the fungus applied and actually become epizootic. So that really is key and will need to be addressed more closely for these local strains.
So if you had to say what the first step would be, what would the first step be?
You mean as far as the research side? Definitely characterizing better the local strains and doing some of the research to show, in comparison, particularly to the commercial products, how well do they do at combating? That would really be from the research side.
And Darcy, you can follow up on the permitting side, yes, with Greg?
Yes, I'll follow up and email you the answers.
Okay, thanks.
No problem, Chris.
So on the ozone question, are you, Peter Follett would be the best contact on the ozone treatment. He's our quarantine entomologist. We had Jack Armstrong worked on ozone treatment of coffee, maybe 12, 13 years ago. And so if we want to pick that up and go forward with that, we could. We would have to involve USDA APHIS, of course, because any quarantine treatment that we come up with that's effective would have to be approved by APHIS.
Yeah, there was, I think we had a meeting with Nick about this, and the question was, I don't recall, it had something to do with whether the treatments were done in a vacuum or not. And the research that was done was not in a vacuum, but in order to be effective, the chamber, fumigation chamber needs to be in a vacuum. I believe that's where the snag came. So maybe we need to pick up where Dr. Armstrong left off on that.
Yeah, we probably need to do more research. Jack's research may not have been conclusive enough for APHIS. So.
Okay. Welcome questions from the audience. I want to focus while we have everybody on quarantine facilities. We understand the clean plant network may be a giant step forward in moving that. But CLR has taught us that the quarantine facilities in the state are less than what's needed on an ongoing basis. So we understand that HARC has some capability at Montewilly and could use some investments. Tyler, can you speak to that?
Sure. I think one thing that people haven't mentioned is that in most other states, if not all other states, the use of private quarantine facilities is very common. So this is not a new idea. This is what most other states do. So I just think it's important to acknowledge that. And then, like I said, we have the tissue culture facility at our Cunha location in the lab. And then we do also have quite a bit of greenhouse space at Montewilly. Don't hold me to these numbers, but with some investment in the property, we think in the greenhouses, we can be producing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of plants per year, probably closer to 500,000. But like I said, that's just a rough number. But it all, of course, depends on how long they have to be held there. So kind of the magic number is once they come out of tissue culture, or once you've transplanted into seedling containers, is about 3 to 4 months. After 3 to 4 months, you have to space them out, and they start requiring a significant more amount of room, therefore reducing the throughput. So I think ideally, if we can determine that it's safe, 3 to 4 months in the greenhouse would be, like I said, it's kind of the tipping point.
And do you have a sense of dollar amounts that would help revitalize that facility?
So for the 2 greenhouses, so that very much depends on the restrictions put in place. So it depends on what the rules are to qualify as a quarantine facility. But to really upgrade them and just at the basic level, not including any very, like specific quarantine restrictions, probably be in the neighborhood of $200,000, $300,000. And that's mostly just to get them all rescreened and get new paneling so that there's no pukas and, nice clean benches and, a floor that is easier to clean and things of that nature. Irrigation system designed for coffee.
I think that's important for us to know as we try and advocate for you. Okay. Any more questions from anyone on quarantine facilities? So Helmut, it's come up that using the clean plant network would potentially allow plant material to be released directly into the field without being quarantined in Hawaii for a year as what's the current practice. What's the timeline for it to be quarantined in another state? Do we know?
Yes, thank you for the question, Chris. And that's what we are working with APHIS PPQ right now. That's what I mentioned, the naturalization process from importing coffee material from overseas into the continental US. How long does it have to be there? We're still waiting from hearing back from my state plant health director here, Vernon, what the time frame would be. It shouldn't be, and we just heard Tyler's presentation. The whole point of doing all this is to minimize the waiting time for the industry to get clean material into Hawaii. So 3 months, and what I just heard from Tyler. So there's a reasonable time frame.
And the one thing I do want to add, and I think I've talked to Darcy a little bit about this recently, there actually is a burgeoning coffee industry in Florida and California. And the University of Florida has a agent, an extension agent or researcher. And I think, I think some folks are reaching out to them, and it's possible that they might have some stuff that we would be very interested in. It's been here for, a decent amount of time. So I think pursuing those networks is really good.
I have made some of those inquiries already, Tyler and Chris, to identify what kind of varieties are existing on the continent. And Tyler, I'll need to touch base with you once I get a list to find out some of the best profiles in terms of CLR resistance that might be desirable. So we and it's not just the varieties that we're looking at this point. We're also looking at capacities for partnership in terms of doing a micropropagation, a lab, and potentially even some of the initial grow outs to provide a healthy stream of plants that, depending upon what the final model for this program will look like. So it's all not going as fast as I'd like, but fast as I would like would mean we'd already be enrolling this right now.
Yeah, and the thing to remember, that we talk about micropropagation or tissue culture as if it's one homogeneous thing, but there are various methods, and there are ways with coffee that we have experience in where you can just take leaf disc from a very small number of plants, and takes, I don't know, maybe 12 to 18 months. Dr. Ming Lee has done it, but you can go from a few hundred to a few 100,000 that way. So I think it's important to keep in mind that micropropagation or tissue culture is not one thing.
I'm more referring to all the different modes of vegetative propagation that we can engage in to basically create clonal lines that can be introduced into Hawaii. So we have a uniform, we can ensure that it is disease-free, pest-free, and it has the traits that we are actually looking for, or the industry needs to support its long-term growth and health.
Okay. We have a question from Nathan. We need more funding for our extension service staff and agents, 3 exclamation points. Also, recommended treatments for CLR CBB stem borers should be posted. Also, can research be done and included at our Kona extension service land? So I think the underlying question is that UH extension needs more outreach resources. And maybe that's directed at our legislators that are on the call. Rep Lowen apologized that she had to step away. She may be back, but we promise we'll follow up with her, make sure she has the recording of this. But any of the legislators on the call want to address funding for the university extension?
Just briefly, we have introduced bills to add additional extension agents. Obviously, they haven't gone too far because Most of that has to go through the money committees, and the money committees decide whether that's an overall state, thing. And I'm just being real about exactly what happens with a lot of these bills, and that's what has been happening. We definitely are advocating for additional monies. Our money committees know that this is a real issue that we have, and we want to again, put back a lot of the funding that was taken away before. So that's something that we're going to be advocating for next year. You will see those bills going through, and ultimately, I want to, put line items in to make sure that the funding, the additional funding does go through. So that's something that we'll be working on. I know Rep. Capella has been advocating for that, Rep. Lowen as well. So just basically, yes, that's something that we're going to be pushing for next session.
So yeah, we find a lot of our initiatives end up on the cutting room floor when they get to the money committees. What can industry stakeholders do to help ensure that doesn't happen?
I mean, ultimately, have these meetings with those legislators. I mean, you're doing the right thing, and meeting with the legislators that are from coffee producing regions, and I think that's important to get everybody on board. But ultimately, the members, Senator Donovan Dela Cruz, and on the House side, Rep. Sylvia Luke. It's important to advocate to them. Have the before session meetings. How important these initiatives are, and the type of funding. How much funding is it? How much is how many extension agents? Maybe we're looking at a statewide thing, so not only extension agents in Kona, but maybe there's one that one of the members, Donovan, might need in Waipahu, or wherever it is, so that he knows that these are statewide concerns, right? Or Senate President on Kauai, for the coffee industry on Kauai. So I think at least that your advocates here on this Zoom call are advocating for these funds and on a daily, weekly session basis. So
I'd also add in that this past year, the legislature did implement a virtual testimony option. And I think that in the future, hopefully the building does open up for in-person testimony, but I am really hopeful that we'll continue to do some sort of blended, so virtual testimony will be an option. And for anyone who is able, it's wonderful to have organizations like HCA coming and testifying consistently, but it is also very helpful to have members of our community testify to the importance and the need of having these extra extension workers across the state, whether it be in a rural community in Chair Dela Cruz's district of Wahiawa, or it's in Kona and Ka'u, or wherever it may be. I think it's really important to have those community members, every single one of you who is on Zoom, who has that capacity, if you have time to jump on and testify and just to share how important it is to you specifically. I think that that's really impactful and can be very helpful.
And I did want to add too, when we get the list of priorities from, HDOA, from university, I think it's really important that we can have those line items of importance, priority projects for the state, then, and that needs to be, and I'm not saying that hasn't been in the past, but that only helps myself and other members prioritize what the industry feels is something that we need to continue funding or fund additionally.
Thank you, Senator and Representative. I want to get to counterfeiting. We had a measure that would add roasted coffee to the counterfeiting law. We understand the department has some concerns about being able to enforce that. So I think they need additional staff. The amendment to the existing law is a rather minor change, so a very simple piece of legislation. And I just want to give some background to everyone on the forum. the HCA had partnered with a company out of New Zealand who was willing to build a statewide database of radioisotope mapping, which would give us the ability to spot check coffee for its chemical signature to see where it originated from. That would be a huge tool for us to help thwart counterfeiting. When the Kona class action suit was filed, that company did not want to get dragged into the lawsuit, so their offer was withdrawn. Once that suit is settled, hopefully we can take up that conversation again with that company. But in the meantime, we want to put some teeth into the legislation, into the statutes that would give us the tools to enact some meaningful penalties against folks who would counterfeit Hawaiian coffee. Currently, I think it's a Class C felony to counterfeit green coffee, except, as I said, most of the coffee that's counterfeited is in roasted products. And that carries with it a $1,000 fine, which isn't nearly enough. So if we're looking to amend the legislation on counterfeiting, we would also be looking to increase the penalties for violators. So that may be an initiative that some of the legislators on the call can get behind. Anyone want to take that?
As I said in my earlier my intro, you know, I introduced the one of the bills that would add roasted coffee to the false, you know, to the offense of false labeling, and also increase penalties to further protect the Kona, further protect the brand. So that's something that I'm going to be definitely continuing to advocate for next session.
Thank you, Senator.
This is Stuart. If I could add something to that, a lot of this might also need some work at the federal level, since a lot of the counterfeiting is beyond the state territory area. Yeah.
Yes, that's true. It's much harder to control that on a federal level. But I appreciate the comment.
And I think, you know, Chris, it'd be important to, you know, I don't know if our federal delegation, I mean, knows the extent of it, but I mean, definitely something to talk story with those members, and we'll do the same thing to at least make sure it's on their radar, and something to look at whether legislation is needed or anything else.
Thanks. We're getting a number of questions that are very specific. As I said earlier, we're trying to focus on overall industry priorities. I've put my email address in the chat. If we don't get to your question, please feel free to email me after the session, and I'll try and direct your questions where they need to go to get you some specific answers. Question from Robert regarding testimony of support or contest a piece of legislation. Is there a place for register to be notified prior to hearings and submit written testimony? Yes, the Hawaii Legislature website. You could Google Hawaii Legislature and you can sign up there for notifications. You can set up a tracking list and submit testimony through that website. It's a pretty good platform that we use all the time. From CTAHR, for farmers and for short-term impact, how can we get DOA to allow subsidy money to move smoothly to go towards coffee tree health? For example, fertilizer, and not only for chemical inputs. Legislators need to secure appropriations for continued subsidy programs for at least 5 more years, since varieties are slow to happen. But with state funding, we need DOA program agreement in advance. So I think the question focuses on A, fertilizer, and B, a longer term commitment.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That's in the works. Rep Lowen stated earlier, trying to figure out at what point does the subsidy program expire, and ultimately you folks are going to be the ones to tell us when and what the best time frame would be, because the program wasn't set up to be there forever. But continuing forward, we are extending. I mean, we have been extending it. Fertilizers was on our radar, as Rep Capella and Rep Lowen stated earlier as well, to look at whether the types of fertilizers should be added to that specific legislation, or there's other means that HDOA was looking at to propose for us to help with that area. So that's currently happening.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, I'm gonna get back to our priority list. The 51% blend legislation, that's been a priority for the KCFA for a number of years. The HCA has historically opposed that, and in recent years we have reversed our position under certain conditions. We also realized that there was too much division in the industry, and that going into hearings with something less than a unified voice was extremely unproductive. Coffee industry was often referred to as those guys can't get their act together, paraphrasing. So we made a conscious decision to work with the KCFA. We invited them to join our board, and they have. And they've been great collaborators since. We look forward to collaborating on that issue as well. So we're going to follow their lead on the bill introduction, and we will review that legislation and amend it or support it as needed. The most recent version that we've seen is something that we do support. So we look forward to making progress there. We have any questions on that? Okay. And by the way, that image of the industry at the Capitol not only hurt that effort, but also had impacts on other legislation and trying to get bills heard. It's one thing to get a bill drafted and get it introduced, but having it heard and moved out and getting the right referrals, there's a lot that goes into it. It's not like ordering something on Amazon, that's for sure. Okay, any more questions from the audience? Okay, I'm gonna go down the list again. CBB CLR subsidies, we talked about that. Roasted products counterfeiting law, we spoke about that. DOA, we have ongoing support for HDOA on a number of different issues. We talked about blending. We talked about quarantine facilities. We talked about ozone. We talked about permitting for localized Bavaria. We talked about labor. Crop insurance is ongoing, and that's at a federal level, and we don't have any federal representatives from RMA, I don't believe, today, but those conversations are continuing. Lastly, we have supporting amendments to grade standards for green coffee. We know that the temporary rule sunsetted not very long ago, And we're taking a second look at some of the amendments that need to be made, and the quality assurance and traceability of coffee. There's a number of elements to that relating to certification and accessibility to certification and streamlining the process as a whole and giving the department ample resources to be able to execute it. We're also hearing that coffee leaf rust is having an impact on coffee quality. So we're trying to get our arms around that issue and see what, if anything, needs to be made to the proposed rules. So it's a lengthy process. We have a letter ready to go to the department. We understand that there'll be some collaboration among industry and the department, and then the department needs to go out to community outreach, I believe, on all islands. Does anyone from the department want to speak to the process to amending grade standards? And then after the outreach, I understand it goes to the Board of Ag.
Sorry, Chris, this is Helmut. I'm sorry, this is not in my field, but I will get the answer to you.
Yeah, I was hoping to edify folks on the call, hear right from the department what the process entails. We've been down the road before. We know it's a lengthy process. We understand you're new to the department and understand it'll take a while to get acclimated, but we want to do everything we can to help you help us. All right, it looks like the questions are waning. Does anyone else have a question? Okay, as I said, and thank you, Rep. Capella, for posting the capital.hawaii.gov website. A lot of great resources there where you can track bills and write testimony, get in touch with your legislators. They have various committees there. You can track bills, find out the status of them, read testimony, read committee reports. It's all very interesting and useful when it works well. Not talking about the platform itself, but when we can actually get laws changed and get appropriations made to help support our industry. If there's no more questions, again, email me after if I didn't get to your question. I can direct those questions to the appropriate party, get the answers you're looking for if I can't answer them myself. It's now, we're right on time. So I just want to thank everyone, all of our panelists, legislators in particular, the researchers, the regulators, and our entire audience. And I also want to thank Ala Kostenko, our event coordinator, for managing the platform and making sure everything runs smoothly. So thank you all and wish you aloha and a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.